All right, welcome back to the Leader Link podcast. This is your host, Charles Heasley. And this is the final installment of a mini series to get us started back up with the relaunch of Leader Link podcast. And today we're going to be talking about delegation. If you're overwhelmed as a leader, is it really that you have too much to do, or is it possible that maybe you haven't let go of some things that you need to? Imagine a stressed out, burned out leader just in their office, face in their palms, stressed out, and the team is standing outside the door just waiting to be told what to do or waiting to be given something to do. Believe it or not, this actually happens a little bit more than you would expect. I was recently in a coaching discussion on a call with somebody who had been promoted multiple times in the organization, and bright young guy. I think he'd been promoted 4 or 5 times to different levels within the same company. And we were going over some of his activities. What is it that you're doing? And I asked him, okay, everything you're doing, is that really something you need to be owning? And he said, actually, some of the things that I'm doing now, I did in my previous leadership role, and the previous role before that, and the previous role before that, and so forth. So basically, he gets promoted to new levels of responsibility, but keeps some of the same tasks. And it's understandable how that could cause a lot of stress. So one of the things we're working on in our time together is how to delegate effectively. And it's a little bit more challenging when you have to delegate multiple levels down, but we're gonna help them with that. All right, so let's just start off with a question. Why don't leaders tend to delegate? What gets in the way? Well, there's a lot of reasons. One of them, believe it or not, this is the most common answer that I get, is that they're too busy. They're too busy doing the work to delegate the tasks. And I get that. When you think about delegation, there is a time commitment involved. You have to train, you have to coach, and we're going to talk about the steps to delegation towards the end of this episode. But yes, it is initial time investment. So while I understand that the argument could be that we're too busy, in reality, we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot if we're going to take every activity and own it. The second reason why people tend to not delegate is there's a fear of losing some control. You're never going to be fully able to delegate responsibility. You still are going to maintain some responsibility, and that can be a little unnerving if you have to assign somebody else a task to do. But that also kind of goes to our next point, which is the fact that sometimes leaders don't trust the people. And that's a whole issue that we could unpack in a series of podcasts, really, on how to develop trust with your team. But getting to know your people is essential. It's very hard to lead a stranger. And the more you get to know people, the more you can develop that trusting relationship. Again, trust is a whole nother issue that we can delve into another episode. Another really common reason that I hear of why people choose not to delegate is that they know that they can do it better and quicker. Again, this kind of goes back to the argument about being too busy. Okay, yes, you may right now be able to do things better and quicker, but if you're so overwhelmed with tasks, wouldn't you want to free up a little bit of that stress? And yes, there is going to be a learning curve for whoever you delegate things to. They're not going to do things perfectly the first time, more than likely. But that's usually okay. And because over time, as people start to take on more and more things and take things off your plate, then you have more of an opportunity to spend time in your areas of the most important activities. All right, that takes us into why it's important to delegate. What I just said, you have more time to spend in what we refer to as high payoff activities. What is it that you as a leader are able to do that brings the most value to your organization? And it is oftentimes not the tasks. Typically it's planning, forecasting, making those relationships with your team members, things like that that are not necessarily the making of the widget. Second reason why it's important to delegate is because it gets employees involved. And if employees are involved and they realize, oh, somebody is trusting me with this, it makes them feel more important, which makes them feel more engaged. So, number one, it's motivational. The second thing is if you delegate, you're actually developing the skill set of those employees. So in other words, you're increasing the bench strength, the leadership bench strength in your organization. And when it's time for them to step into leadership roles, they're going to be a little bit more prepared. Okay, so if they feel like what they're doing is important and it's developing them, again, these things increase employee motivation, which is so essential right now, considering that we are still hovering around only 31% of employees, according to Gallup, are actively engaged in their organization. We have about 70% of our workforce that is disengaged or actively disengaged. Delegation can actually help with that. All right, we got a lot to cover still. So the next thing to think about is your daily activities. What are things that only you can do that you need to own? You keep those. But then think about what is it that you're doing that somebody else could be doing. And essentially, we're looking at what can be delegated. Some general rules for delegation that I like to follow is, ideally, decisions will be made at the lowest level possible. If you have to make every single decision, that could be very problematic, and it can actually slow things down. Making decisions at the lowest level possible. Another thing is training your people to bring you solutions or ideas, not just problems. So if people are only coming to you with problems and you're having to fix everything and be the hero all the time, we're actually doing a disservice to people, because as a leader, one of your jobs is to help people increase their judgment, help them develop their problem-solving skills, and help them increase their decision-making abilities. In other words, helping people come up with solutions. So again, decisions at the lowest level possible, and come to me with solutions, not just problems. All right, here's the real meat. Here's your steps of delegation. And some of these may not be in 100% the right order for you, but generally this is the order I would like to think about things. Number one, you got to select the right people. So after you decide what can be delegated, we got to figure out who is the right person for this job. Do they have the ability already, or do they have the ability to learn this skill? And let's also make sure that they have the bandwidth for this, because what I see tend to happen when delegation is not intentional is we will go to those star performers, the ones that we know can take on anything. They're motivated, they enjoy helping. But if we're not careful as a leader and we just give everything to one or two people, we can easily burn them out. All right, so you got to select the right people. Second thing is we have to explain not only what the job entails, but why it's important. Understanding the why behind things is very motivational, or it should be motivational. They are now doing something that has even greater responsibility and contributing to the organization in a different way than just their standard job description. Understanding the value behind that is essential. All right, the third thing is we need to establish reasonable deadlines. When does this job need to be completed? Now, sometimes what I've seen is that leaders will set the deadline. They'll say, yeah, by this date, this project needs to be done. And then they disappear. And then they check back in with the employee on the date that it's supposed to be due. And the employee's like, I'm not ready yet. And then both people are in a bad position, because the leader still retains responsibility. You can't ever fully delegate responsibility. You can only delegate authority. And the employee now is in a bad position because they're stressed. They want to do, people want to do a good job by and large. And so now they're stressed because you're showing up on the deadline. They haven't gotten it ready, and now everyone's in a bad position. So there's a balance here. You don't want to have constant oversight where you're checking in with them every day, multiple times a day. That's basically micromanagement, and that causes stress. Remember, if you're getting them involved, they're important, and so now you're in a position where this is a developmental tool. Constant oversight, you're still completely involved. So instead of constant oversight and instead of being completely absent, a good medium is to check in with regular frequency. And this could be depending on the employee's skill level. It could be depending on the project that's been delegated or the task that's been delegated. But basically, a check-in says, "I'm here for you if you need me. I'm here to coach. I want you to let me know if there's any issues, if something is not going to get done in time, if there's a resource that you need that I'm not aware of, if there's training, et cetera, et cetera." It basically just keeps that line of communication open. All right, the next step is to make sure that the expected results, not just the timeline, but the expected results, what success looks like, is clearly explained in measurable terms. They need to know, what will success look like. In an ideal circumstance, they can see some sort of example, but if there is no example to give them, we need to paint that picture. The next piece is to ensure that they have all the training, all the resources that they need. Make sure, again, to keep that line of communication open. Here's one that doesn't really get mentioned all the time, but I think it's critical. Express your confidence in their ability to do it. Again, if you give somebody more responsibility by delegating something to them, it can be very stressful because now this added pressure is on, and they know that if they don't complete it or they don't complete it up to standards, it's not only going to make them look worse, but it has an influence on you. And most employees, not everyone, but most employees want to protect the image of themselves, but also of their boss. So express your confidence in their ability and genuinely mean it. I would say a last but not final step is to reward results. If you see that they're putting in the effort, if you see that they're delivering the results that we've asked them to, a genuine thank you and whatever form of reward you think is appropriate. But we need to, in order to create a culture where people realize that delegation and added responsibility is not a punishment, it is actually a way to recognize and build competence. One of the ways to do that is to make the results feel good. I have done something valuable for the organization. A couple of quick tips to wrap this up. Number one, I can't express the importance of checking in enough. Again, check-in isn't hovering, it's not micromanaging. I just don't want you to be surprised if the project is delayed or if it's not up to specification. We can never fully distance ourselves once we've delegated something, because especially if it's the employee's first or second or third time, we need to make sure that they know that we're there as a resource and as a coach. The second one is patience. Delegation is tough because it is most likely not going to get done exactly the way you want it, and that is actually okay. Again, we're building employees' judgment, decision-making, problem-solving skills. This takes time. They're not going to do everything perfect. They're not going to do everything the way you would do it. But if the job is getting done and it's still right, then you've succeeded in delegation. Call to action for this week: find one activity that you can delegate, find the right person, and walk through the steps that we discussed. We'll see you next Tuesday for the next mini-series.